Li Hua pressed her face against the cold ship window and watched America grow bigger on the horizon. Her hands shook as she held the crumpled letter that would change her life forever. The writing was in English, but the Chinese translator in her village had read it to her many times. A man named Thomas needed a wife. He had 3 daughters and a farm in Montana. He promised her a home, food, and safety if she would care for his children. The ship rocked back and forth, making Li Hua feel sick. Around her, other Chinese women sat quietly, each holding their own letters and dreams. Some were going to work in laundries or restaurants. Others, like Li Hua, were traveling to marry men they had never met. The smell of fish and unwashed bodies filled the air below deck, where the Chinese passengers were kept. Li Hua closed her eyes and remembered her village back in China. The crops had failed 3 years in a row. Her father owed money to the village leader. Her mother cried every night, wondering how they would eat. When the marriage broker came to their village, Li Hua's parents saw a chance to save their family. If she married the American farmer, he would send money to help her parents pay their debts. "It's better than starving," her mother had whispered as she packed Li Hua's few belongings. "In America, you can have a good life." But sitting on this cold ship, Li Hua wasn't sure about anything. She was only 22 years old and had never been far from her village. She spoke very little English. She knew nothing about taking care of American children or cooking American food. What if this Thomas person was mean? What if his daughters hated her? What if she made a terrible mistake? The other women on the ship shared their fears too. During the long nights, they whispered stories they had heard about Chinese women in America. Some found kind husbands who treated them well. Others worked as servants for families who looked down on them. A few had husbands who were cruel or drunk too much. "You have to be strong," said Mrs. Chen, an older woman who was going to San Francisco to work in her cousin's restaurant. "American life is different. The food is different. The language is different. But if you work hard and keep your dignity, you can make a good life." Li Hua touched the small jade bracelet her grandmother had given her before she died. It was the only valuable thing she owned. Her grandmother had always said jade brought good luck and protection. Li Hua hoped the old stories were true. After 2 weeks at sea, the ship finally reached Angel Island. This was where Chinese people had to wait before they could enter America. Li Hua spent 3 more days in a crowded building, answering questions from American officials. They wanted to know why she was coming to America, who was meeting her, and whether she had any diseases. The questions scared her. Through a translator, she explained about her marriage arrangement. She showed them Thomas's letter and the money he had sent for her travel. The officials looked at her with suspicious eyes as if they didn't believe her story. Finally, they stamped her papers and told her she could enter America. San Francisco was bigger and noisier than anything Li Hua had ever imagined. The streets were full of horses, carriages, and people speaking languages she didn't understand. The buildings were so tall they seemed to touch the sky. Chinese people lived in one part of the city, in small crowded rooms above shops that sold familiar foods and medicines. Li Hua stayed 2 nights with a Chinese family who helped new immigrants. The wife, Mrs. Wong, spoke both Chinese and English. She helped Li Hua buy American clothes and taught her important English words like hello, thank you, and please. American women dress differently, Mrs. Wong explained as she helped Li Hua put on a long, heavy dress with many buttons. "Your Chinese clothes are beautiful, but they will make you stand out. It's better to dress like them, especially in small towns." Mrs. Wong also taught Li Hua about American customs. American families eat with forks and knives, not chopsticks. They don't take off their shoes in the house. The children might not bow to show respect like Chinese children do. Don't take it personally if they seem rude at first. They just don't know our ways. On her last morning in San Francisco, Li Hua walked through Chinatown one more time. She bought some dried herbs and special tea that reminded her of home. She also bought small gifts for Thomas's daughters, hoping they might help her make friends with the girls. At the train station, Li Hua felt scared and excited at the same time. The train was huge and black with smoke coming out of its chimney. She had never seen anything like it. Other passengers stared at her as she found her seat. Some looked curious, others seemed unfriendly. The train journey took 3 days. Li Hua watched America roll by through her window. She saw mountains, forests, rivers, and endless fields of grass. Sometimes the train stopped at small towns where cowboys on horses waited at the stations. Everything was so different from the rice fields and small villages she knew in China. At night, Li Hua lay in her narrow train bed and wondered what Thomas looked like. His letter said he was 35 years old and had owned his farm for 10 years. His wife had died of sickness 2 years ago, leaving him to raise 3 daughters alone. The oldest was 11, the middle one was 9, and the youngest was only 6. Li Hua tried to imagine what it would be like to suddenly become a mother to 3 American girls. In China, she had helped take care of her younger cousins, but those children spoke her language and understood her ways. These girls would be strangers who missed their real mother. Would they accept her? Would she be able to love them as her own children? The letter also said Thomas needed help with his farm work. Li Hua knew how to grow vegetables and take care of chickens from her life in China, but American farming might be completely different. She worried that she wouldn't be strong enough or smart enough to do everything he expected. On the final day of her journey, Li Hua changed into her best American dress and braided her long black hair neatly. She looked at herself in the small mirror Mrs. Wong had given her. The face looking back seemed older than 22. The long journey and worry had added lines around her eyes. As the train slowed down at a small Montana station, Li Hua's heart beat so fast she thought it might jump out of her chest. Through the window she could see a tall man in work clothes standing next to 3 young girls. The man held a piece of paper, probably with her name on it. This was it. After traveling halfway around the world, she was about to meet the family that would become hers. Li Hana took a deep breath, picked up her small bag, and walked toward the train door. Whatever happened next, there was no going back. Her old life in China was over. Her new life in America was about to begin. She stepped off the train and onto American soil, carrying all her hopes and fears with her. The man who would be her husband was walking toward her, and 3 pairs of young eyes were watching her every move. Thomas Morrison stood at the train station, his hat in his hands, watching the small Chinese woman step carefully down from the train. She looked even younger than he had expected and much more frightened. Her dark eyes searched the platform until they found his face. He held up the paper with her name written in Chinese characters, and she walked slowly toward him. Behind Thomas, his 3 daughters pressed close together like scared animals. Rose, the oldest at 11, had her arms protectively around her younger sisters. 9-year-old Grace kept her eyes on the ground, while little Hope, only 6, peeked out from behind Rose's skirt. "You must be Li Hua," Thomas said gently, trying to remember how the marriage broker had told him to pronounce her name. She nodded and gave a small bow, which made the girls giggle nervously. "These are my daughters," Thomas continued, placing his hands on each girl's shoulder. "Rose, Grace, and Hope." Li Hua smiled and bowed again, but the girls just stared at her. The wagon ride to the farm was the longest hour of Thomas's life. He had practiced some things to say, but now his mind went blank. Li Hua sat straight and quiet beside him, her small bag clutched in her lap. The girls whispered to each other in the back of the wagon, their voices carrying on the wind. "Papa, she looks so different," Hope whispered loudly, making Grace shush her. "Her clothes are strange," Rose added, "and her eyes are shaped funny." Thomas felt his face get hot with embarrassment. "Girls, that's enough," he said firmly. In the corner of his eye, he saw Li Hua's shoulders tense up. Even though she probably didn't understand all the words, she could tell the children were talking about her. When they reached the farm, Thomas helped Li Hua down from the wagon. She looked around at the house, the barn, and the fields stretching out in every direction. Her face didn't show what she was thinking, but Thomas wondered if she was disappointed. The house needed paint and the fence had broken boards. It wasn't much compared to the grand American home she might have imagined. "This is your home now," Thomas said, carrying her bag toward the house. Li Hua followed him, stepping carefully in her long dress. Inside, the house was clean but plain. Thomas had tried to tidy up, but he knew it still looked like a place where a man and 3 children lived without a woman's touch. Dishes were stacked roughly on shelves, clothes hung on chairs instead of in closets, and dust-covered surfaces he had forgotten to wipe. "Your room is here," Thomas said, opening the door to what had been his and his late wife Mary's bedroom. He had moved his things to the small room next to the kitchen. Li Hua stepped inside and looked around at the simple bed, the wooden dresser, and the window that faced the mountains. "Thank you," she said in careful English. Her voice was soft and musical, very different from Mary's voice, which had been loud and cheerful. That first evening was painful for everyone. Thomas had asked Mrs. Patterson, his nearest neighbor, to prepare some food and leave it for them. But Mrs. Patterson had made beef stew, which Li Hua clearly didn't know how to eat properly. She held her fork awkwardly and tried to cut the large pieces of meat, spilling gravy on her dress. The girls watched everything Li Hua did with wide eyes. When she tried to help clear the table, she accidentally knocked over Hope's cup of milk. Hope started crying, and Li Hua looked like she wanted to cry too. "It's all right," Thomas said quickly, cleaning up the mess. "Accidents happen." But Rose crossed her arms and said, "Mama never spilled things." That night, after the girls were in bed, Thomas sat with Li Hua at the kitchen table. She had changed into a simpler dress and let her long hair fall loose over her shoulders. In the lamplight, she looked very young and very far from home. "I know this is hard," Thomas said slowly, trying to use simple words she would understand. "The girls miss their mother very much. It will take time." Li Hua nodded. She pulled out a small piece of paper and showed him some English words she had written down. "I learn," she said. "I try to be good mother." Thomas felt something stir in his chest. This small woman had come so far and was trying so hard. "You don't have to be their mother right away," he said. "Just be their friend first." The next morning, Li Hua woke up before everyone else. Thomas found her in the kitchen, staring at the big iron stove with a confused look on her face. In China, she had cooked over small fires or simple clay stoves. This American stove was like a black metal monster to her. "Let me show you," Thomas said, demonstrating how to build a fire in the stove and adjust the heat. Li Hua watched carefully and asked him to show her again. Her hands were small and soft compared to his rough, work-hardened ones. When the girls came down for breakfast, they found Li Hua trying to make pancakes. But something had gone wrong with the batter, and the pancakes were thin and rubbery. Grace made a face when she tasted hers, and Rose pushed her plate away. "I'm not eating this," Rose announced. "I want real food." Li Hua's face turned red, but she didn't say anything. She just took the bad pancakes away and started over. This time Thomas helped her measure the flour and milk correctly. The second batch was better, though still not like what the girls were used to. After breakfast, while Thomas did his morning chores, Li Hua tried to help the girls get ready for school. But she didn't understand how American children dressed or fixed their hair. Rose, who usually braided her own hair and helped her sisters, became impatient with Li Hua's attempts to help. "You're doing it wrong," Rose said, pulling away when Li Hua tried to braid her hair. "That's not how Mama did it." Li Hua stepped back, her hands falling to her sides. Grace and Hope looked back and forth between their sister and their new stepmother, not knowing what to do. "Rose, mind your manners," Thomas said as he came back into the house, but he could see the hurt in Li Hua's eyes. The days that followed were full of small disasters and misunderstandings. Li Hua tried to help with laundry but used too much soap, creating a mountain of bubbles that Hope found hilarious and Rose found annoying. She attempted to cook familiar foods but had to use American ingredients that tasted different from what she knew. The language barrier made everything harder. When Grace cut her finger on a broken jar, Li Hua wanted to help but couldn't explain that she knew how to treat small wounds. She had to stand by helplessly while Thomas bandaged his daughter's hand, feeling useless and unwanted. At night, Li Hua often heard the girls whispering in their room next to hers. They missed their mother terribly and didn't understand why their father had brought this strange woman into their house. Sometimes she heard one of them crying softly and her heart broke a little more. Thomas tried to be patient and kind, but he was struggling too. He had married Li Hua because he needed help, but now he wondered if he had made things harder for everyone. His girls were unhappy, his new wife seemed lost and sad, and he felt caught in the middle of it all. One evening, as Li Hua sat alone on the front porch after another difficult day, Thomas came and sat beside her. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "I know you're homesick," he said quietly. "I know this isn't what you expected." Li Hua looked at him with tears in her eyes. "I try hard," she whispered. "But girls no like me. I know, good mother." "You are good," Thomas said firmly. "You just need time. We all need time." As they sat there in the growing darkness, both of them wondered if time would be enough to turn four strangers into a real family. Inside the house, 3 little girls lay in their beds, missing their mother and wishing their lives could go back to the way they used to be. But life never goes backward, only forward. And somewhere in the quiet Montana night, The first tiny seeds of understanding were beginning to take root, even though none of them could see it yet. 3 weeks into her new life, Li Hua still felt like a stranger in her own home. Every morning brought new challenges and small failures. The American stove still confused her. The girls' clothes needed mending in ways she didn't understand, and simple conversations felt like climbing mountains. But Li Hua had not survived a journey across the ocean by giving up easily. Her grandmother had always said, "Water finds its way around rocks by being patient and persistent." So Li Hua decided to try a different approach. Instead of trying to cook American food that always turned out wrong, she decided to make something she knew how to cook well. She had brought some special spices and dried vegetables from San Francisco's Chinatown. That evening, while Thomas was teaching the girls arithmetic at the kitchen table, Li Hua quietly started preparing a simple Chinese soup with chicken and ginger. The smell filled the kitchen, different from anything the family had experienced before. Little Hope wrinkled her nose and asked, "What's that smell, Papa?" "I think Li Hua is cooking something special," Thomas replied, looking curious himself. When dinner was ready, Li Hua served the soup nervously. She had made some rice too, though she wasn't sure if the family would like it. The girls looked suspiciously at their bowls, but Thomas took a big spoonful and tasted it thoughtfully. "This is very good," he said with surprise. "It's different, but it tastes warm and comforting." Encouraged by his reaction, Grace tried a small sip. Her eyes widened. "It's not scary at all," she announced. "It tastes like when Mama made chicken soup but with different flavors." Even Rose, who had been the most resistant to everything Li Hua did, admitted the soup was not bad. Hope, always the most adventurous of the three, asked for seconds. That small success gave Li Hua confidence to try other things. She noticed that the girls' winter clothes had tears and missing buttons. Instead of trying to fix them the American way, she used the fine needlework skills her mother had taught her. She embroidered tiny flowers over the tears, turning damage into decoration. When Rose saw the delicate pink roses Li Hua had sewn onto her favorite dress, she stared in amazement. "How did you make them so small and perfect?" she asked, forgetting to be unfriendly for a moment. Li Hua smiled and showed Rose the special stitches she used. "In China, all girls learn this," she explained in her careful English. "My mother teach me when I very small, like Hope." "Could you teach me?" Grace asked shyly. She had always loved pretty things but had never been good at sewing. That afternoon, Li Hua sat with Grace and patiently showed her how to make tiny, even stitches. Grace's first attempts were clumsy, but Li Hua encouraged her with gentle words and helped guide her hands. For the first time since Li Hua's arrival, the house felt peaceful. Hope, not wanting to be left out, climbed onto Li Hua's lap to watch. Li Hua tensed at first, not sure if the little girl really wanted to be close to her. But Hope settled comfortably against her, playing with Li Hua's long braid while her sister learned to embroider. Thomas, coming in from his work with the cattle, stopped in the doorway when he saw them together. Grace was concentrating hard on her stitches. Hope was chattering happily about the colors in Li Hua's hair ribbon. And Li Hua was smiling more naturally than he had seen since her arrival. Even Rose, though she pretended to be reading in the corner, was watching the sewing lesson with interest. The real test came a few days later when Grace fell sick with a fever. Thomas had planned to ride to town for the doctor, but a sudden snowstorm made the journey impossible. Grace lay in bed, hot and restless, while her sisters worried and Thomas paced the kitchen anxiously. Li Hua had been watching Grace carefully. In her village in China, her aunt had been known for healing sick children with special teas and treatments. Li Hua wasn't sure if she should suggest helping, but when Grace started crying from the fever, her motherly instincts overcame her shyness. "I know help for fever," she told Thomas quietly. "In China, my aunt teach me." "You let me try?" Thomas was desperate enough to try anything. "What do you need?" Li Hua gathered some of the herbs she had brought from San Francisco and brewed a special tea. She also soaked cloths in cool water with a few drops of peppermint oil. Very gently, she helped Grace sit up and drink small sips of the bitter tea, then placed the cool cloths on her forehead and wrists. "The tea tastes yucky," Grace complained weakly. "I know," Li Hua said softly, brushing Grace's hair back from her sweaty forehead. "But it helped fever go away. You be strong, girl, drink little bit more." For 2 days and nights, Li Hua barely left Grace's bedside. She changed the cool cloths, made sure Grace drank enough water, and sang soft Chinese lullabies when the fever made Grace restless. Thomas found himself moved by how tenderly Li Hua cared for his daughter, as if Grace were her own child. Rose and Hope took turns sitting with their sister too, but they watched in amazement as Li Hua seemed to know exactly what Grace needed before she even asked for it. When Grace's fever finally broke on the third morning, she woke up weak but clearly better. The first thing she saw was Li Hua asleep in the chair beside her bed, still holding a damp cloth in her hand. "Li Hua stayed with me all night?" Grace whispered to her father. "She hasn't left your side since you got sick," Thomas replied. "She was so worried about you." Grace looked at Li Hua with new eyes. This woman who had seemed so strange and foreign had taken care of her like a real mother would. When Li Hua woke up and saw Grace sitting up and asking for food, tears of relief filled her eyes. "You feel better?" she asked, touching Grace's forehead to check for fever. "Much better," Grace said. Then, in a very small voice, she added, "Thank you for taking care of me." It was the first time any of the girls had thanked Li Hua for anything. The words were simple, but they meant everything to a woman who had been trying so hard to find her place in this family. That evening, as Grace slept peacefully and the crisis had passed, something had changed in the house. Rose helped Li Hua prepare dinner without being asked. Hope climbed onto Li Hua's lap during story time. And Grace, still weak but grateful, asked Li Hua to braid her hair, the special way you showed me. Thomas watched these small changes with a mixture of relief and growing respect for his wife. Li Hua had proven that her care for his daughters was real, not just duty. She had stepped up when his family needed her most, using her own knowledge and skills to help them. That night, as Li Hua finally got a full night's sleep after days of worry, she dreamed of her grandmother's jade bracelet. In her dream, her grandmother smiled and said, "See? I told you jade brings good luck, but the real luck comes from having a good heart." When Li Hua woke up the next morning, she found a small bouquet of wildflowers on her bedside table. The girls had picked them together and left them for her with a note in Grace's careful handwriting. "Thank you for making me better." It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Li Hana touched the jade bracelet on her wrist and smiled. Maybe, just maybe, she was starting to find her way in this new family after all. Winter arrived in Montana like an angry beast, bringing winds that howled around the house and snow that piled higher than the windows. Li Hua had never experienced cold like this. In her village in China, winter meant cooler days and occasional frost, but nothing like the brutal cold that seemed to seep through the walls and freeze everything it touched. Thomas worked harder than ever during these months, making sure the cattle had shelter and food. Every morning before dawn, he bundled up in thick coats and boots to check on the animals and repair whatever damage the wind and snow had caused during the night. "Winter is the hardest time for ranch families," he explained to Li Hua as he pulled on his heavy gloves. "We have to be ready for anything. Sometimes storms can last for days and we might not be able to get to town for supplies." Li Hua nodded, but she didn't really understand how dangerous Montana winters could be until the big storm hit in January. It started with dark clouds gathering over the mountains. Thomas looked at the sky with worried eyes and began bringing extra firewood into the house. He filled every bucket and pot with water from the well and moved some of their food, supplies from the root cellar, into the kitchen. "Looks like we're going to get hit hard," he told Lee. This could be a bad one." The wind started that evening, rattling the windows and making the house creak like an old ship. By morning, the snow was falling so thick Li Hua couldn't see the barn from the kitchen window. The wind drove the snow sideways, creating drifts that reached halfway up the doors. Thomas spent the morning checking on the cattle in the barn and making sure they had enough hay and water. When he came back to the house, his face was red with cold and worry. "The cattle are secure, but this storm is getting worse," he said, shaking snow off his coat. "I need to check the herd in the far pasture. Some of them might need help finding shelter." "Papa, don't go out there," Rose pleaded. "It looks scary outside." Thomas knelt down and hugged his eldest daughter. "I have to, sweetheart. Those cattle are how we make our living. If we lose them, we lose everything." Li Hua watched him prepare to go back out into the storm. Something cold settled in her stomach, and it wasn't just the winter weather. The wind sounded angry and wild, like it wanted to swallow up anyone brave enough to face it. "Maybe you wait," Li Hua suggested quietly. Storm too strong now. Thomas shook his head. I can't wait. Some of those animals are probably lost and freezing. Every hour I wait makes it more likely we'll lose them. He kissed each of his daughters goodbye and promised to be back before dark. Li Hua wanted to say more, to beg him not to go, but she didn't have the English words to explain the bad feeling growing in her chest. The day passed slowly. Li Hua kept the girls busy with sewing projects and games, but everyone kept looking toward the window, hoping to see Thomas coming back through the snow. The storm grew worse as the day went on. The wind made such loud noises that they had to shout to hear each other across the room. When evening came and Thomas still wasn't home, the girls began to worry openly. Where is Papa? Hope asked, climbing onto Li Hua's lap. He said he'd be back by dark. Li Hua held the little girl close, trying not to let her own fears show. Papa know the land very well, she said calmly. Maybe he find warm place to wait for storm to stop. But inside, Li Hua was terrified. She had heard stories of people getting lost in snowstorms and freezing to death just steps from their own homes. What if something had happened to Thomas? What if he was hurt and couldn't get back to them? What would she do with 3 young girls in the middle of a dangerous storm? Rose, always the most grown-up of the sisters, tried to act brave, but Li Hua could see the fear in her eyes. Grace stood by the window, pressing her face against the glass as if she could somehow see through the thick, swirling snow. Night fell, and still Thomas didn't return. The wind screamed around the house and snow piled up against the doors. Li Hua realized they might be trapped inside for days. Girls, she said, trying to keep her voice steady, we need to be very careful with our firewood and food. The storm might last a long time. She gathered them in the kitchen, which was the warmest room in the house, and had them help her move mattresses and blankets there. If they all slept in one room, they could keep each other warm and use less firewood. Are we going to die? Hope asked in a very small voice. No, Li Hua said firmly, pulling all 3 girls close to her. We are strong. We are smart. We take care of each other. But that night, as the storm raged outside and Thomas's empty chair seemed to stare at them across the room, Li Hua wasn't sure if her words were true. She had never felt so alone and responsible in her life. The second day brought no relief. If anything, the storm was worse. Snow had covered the windows so completely that the house felt like a cave. Li Hua rationed their food carefully, giving the girls larger portions than she took for herself. She told them stories from China to keep their minds off their fears. She taught them simple Chinese words and showed them how to fold paper into birds and flowers. When Hope started crying for her father, Li Hua sang the lullabies her own mother had sung to her as a child. What if Papa is frozen? Grace whispered that evening as they huddled together near the fire. No, Li Hua said, though her own heart was breaking with worry. Your Papa is strong, man. He know this land. He find safe place. Rose looked at Li Hua with eyes that seemed too old for an 11-year-old girl. What happens to us if Papa doesn't come back? It was the question Li Hua had been trying not to think about. What would happen to these 3 girls if Thomas died in the storm? She was their stepmother. But would the law recognize her right to care for them? Would other family members try to take the girls away from her? Would they all lose the farm? But looking at Rose's frightened face and Grace clinging to her arm, and little Hope asleep with her head on Li Hua's shoulder, Li Hua knew that whatever happened, she would fight to keep this family together. If something happened to Papa, Li Hua said quietly, I take care of you always. I promise. We are family now. On the 3rd morning, the wind finally began to die down. Li Hua managed to clear some snow away from one window and saw that the worst of the storm had passed. The snow was still falling, but gently now, and she could see a few feet beyond the house. All day they watched and waited. Li Hua melted snow for water and made a thin soup from their remaining vegetables. The girls took turns standing at the cleared window, hoping to see their father coming home. Just as the sun was setting, Hope shouted, I see something moving. They all rushed to the window and peered out into the gray evening light. There, struggling through the deep snow, was a figure in a heavy coat. It moved slowly, like someone who was very tired or hurt, but it was definitely coming toward the house. Papa! Rose screamed, and all 3 girls ran to the door. Thomas stumbled through the door like a man in a dream. His face was red and raw from the cold, and ice hung from his beard and eyebrows. His hands were so cold he couldn't work the buttons on his coat. Li Hua rushed to help him, her hands shaking with relief. Thomas, we so worried. You hurt? "I'm all right," he said through chattering teeth. "Got caught in the storm. Had to wait it out in an old line shack up on the ridge. Couldn't get back until the wind died down." The girls covered him with hugs and tears, all talking at once about how scared they had been and how glad they were that he was home. Li Hua heated water for him to wash his frozen hands and feet, and made him drink warm tea to chase away the cold. Later that evening, when the girls were finally asleep and Thomas was warm and fed, he looked at Li Hua with new respect in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you for taking care of them. I know it must have been frightening for you too, but you kept them calm and safe." Li Hua felt tears in her eyes. "They are my family now," she said. "I protect them always." And in that moment, Thomas realized that the quiet Chinese woman he had married for practical reasons had become something much more precious. She had proven that when danger came, she would stand strong and protect the people she loved. The storm had tested all of them, and they had come through it together. Spring came to Montana slowly, like a shy child peeking around a corner. The snow began to melt, revealing brown grass and muddy ground underneath. Li Hua had never been so happy to see dirt in her life. After the long, dark winter trapped inside the house, the sight of the first green shoots pushing up through the earth felt like a miracle. The terrible storm had changed something in the Morrison family. The girls no longer saw Li Hua as the strange foreign woman who had invaded their home. They had watched her stay calm and strong when they were all frightened, had felt her arms around them during the scary nights, had heard her promise to protect them no matter what happened. Now when Rose woke up from bad dreams, she didn't call for her papa first. She went to Li Hua's room and climbed into bed beside her, finding comfort in the soft Chinese lullabies that somehow chased away the nightmares. Grace had become Li Hua's constant helper, following her around the house and asking endless questions about everything from cooking to sewing to what China was like. "Did you have sisters there?" she asked one morning as they kneaded bread together. "Do you miss them?" Li Hua's hands paused in their work. "I have one sister younger than you. I miss her very much. But now I have 3 daughters here, so my heart not so lonely." It was the first time Li Hua had called them her daughters, and Grace beamed with pride. Little Hope had claimed Li Hua as her own special person. She insisted on sitting next to Li Hua at every meal, holding her hand during evening prayers, and having her hair braided in the intricate patterns Li Hua had learned as a child in China. When other children at church stared at Hope's unusual hairstyles, she would announce proudly, "My mama Li Hua made this for me." The word mama had started as a slip of the tongue from Hope, but now all 3 girls used it naturally. They still talked about their first mama, Mary, with love and sadness. But Li Hua had found her own place in their hearts without trying to replace the mother they had lost. Thomas watched these changes with amazement and growing warmth in his own heart. He had married Li Hua because he needed help with practical things, housework and childcare and farm chores. He had expected their relationship to be polite but distant, a business arrangement that served both their needs. But as the days grew longer and warmer, Thomas found himself noticing things about Li Hua that had nothing to do with her usefulness. The way she hummed Chinese songs while she worked in her garden, the patience she showed when teaching Hope to write her letters, the gentle way she corrected Grace's table manners without making the girl feel ashamed. Li Hua had started a garden behind the house, using seeds she had brought from San Francisco and others she ordered from a catalog. She grew familiar vegetables, like cabbage and onions, but also strange plants the girls had never seen before. Long beans that climbed up tall poles, leafy greens with names they couldn't pronounce, and herbs that filled the air with exotic smells. "In China, we say food is medicine," Li Hua explained as she showed the girls which plants were good for headaches, which ones helped with stomach troubles, and which ones were just delicious to eat. Thomas found himself looking forward to mealtimes now. Li Hua had learned to cook American dishes that the girls liked, but she also introduced them to Chinese foods that were lighter and more flavorful than anything they had ever tasted. She made dumplings filled with meat and vegetables, noodle soups with ginger and green onions, and stir-fried vegetables that stayed crisp and bright. "I never knew food could taste like this," Thomas admitted one evening as he helped Li Hua clear the dishes. "You're a good cook, better than good." Li Hua blushed at the compliment. "I still learning American way, but I think maybe American family can like Chinese food sometimes too. As they worked side by side in the kitchen, their hands occasionally touched as they reached for the same dish or passed each other in the small space. These moments, brief as they were, made Thomas aware of Li Hua as a woman, not just as a helpful addition to his household. One evening in May, as they sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the mountains pink and gold, Thomas found himself really talking to Li Hua for the first time. Not about practical things like what to fix for dinner or how to mend torn clothes, but about their thoughts and feelings. "Do you ever regret coming here?" he asked quietly. "Your life in China must have been very different." Li Hua was quiet for a long moment, watching Hope chase fireflies in the yard, while Rose and Grace played with their dolls nearby. "In China, I was daughter, someone to take care of, to worry about, to find husband for. Here I am mother, wife, partner. I have purpose. I have, how you say, importance? Value," Thomas suggested. "You have value here." "Yes, value." Li Hua smiled. "In China, I was burdened to my family. Here I am needed. Girls need me. You need me. This feel good." Thomas studied her profile in the fading light. "We do need you. More than I expected when I first wrote that letter. You've made this place feel like a real home again." It was true. The house felt alive now in ways it hadn't since Mary's death. There was always something cooking on the stove, always the sound of Li Hua's voice teaching the girls new words or songs, always small improvements being made. Li Hua had sewn new curtains for the windows, planted flowers around the front porch, and organized the cluttered rooms until everything had its proper place. "You make this feel like home for me too," Li Hua said softly. "First time in my life I choose my family instead of family being chosen for me." As summer progressed, the neighbors began to notice changes in the Morrison family. At church on Sundays, the girls were cleaner and better dressed than they had been since their mother's death. They sat quietly during services and answered politely when adults spoke to them. Some of the women in town had been suspicious of Thomas's Chinese wife at first, whispering about how strange it was for a white man to marry a foreign woman. But they couldn't argue with results. The Morrison girls were clearly thriving under Li Hua's care. Mrs. Patterson, their nearest neighbor, came by one afternoon and found Li Hua teaching Grace to embroider, while Hope learned to count in Chinese, and Rose helped prepare vegetables for dinner. "My goodness," Mrs. Patterson said, looking around at the tidy house and busy, happy children. "You've certainly got things running smoothly here." "Li Hua is the best mama," Hope announced, climbing onto Li Hua's lap. "She makes the prettiest braids and the most delicious soup, and she knows how to make paper birds." Mrs. Patterson raised her eyebrows but smiled. "Is that so? Well, you're very lucky girls." After Mrs. Patterson left, Thomas found Li Hua sitting quietly on the porch, looking thoughtful. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. "Mrs. Patterson was kind to me today," Li Hua said. "But I know some people in town still think I am strange. They whisper when I go to store. They stare at me at church." Thomas felt a flash of anger at anyone who made Li Hua feel unwelcome. People fear what they don't understand, but they'll come around when they see what kind of person you really are. "Sometimes I wonder if girls will have hard time because their mama is Chinese," Li Hua said sadly. "Maybe other children will tease them." Thomas reached over and took her small hand in his larger, rougher one. It was the first time he had touched her except by accident, and both of them felt the significance of the gesture. "Anyone who has a problem with you will have a problem with me," he said firmly. "You're my wife and their mother. Anyone who doesn't respect that doesn't deserve our friendship." Li Hua looked down at their joined hands, feeling something warm and hopeful stirring in her chest. When she had first come to America, she had expected to find safety and security. She had never dared to hope she might find something that felt like the beginning of love. The trouble started on a hot Tuesday in July when Li Hua took the girls to town for supplies. They had been looking forward to the trip all week. Rose wanted new hair ribbons, Grace needed fabric for a dress she was making, and Hope just loved any excuse to visit the general store and look at all the interesting things on the shelves. Li Hannah wore her best American dress and had braided her long black hair in a neat style that wouldn't draw too much attention. She had learned to dress and act in ways that would help her fit in with the other women in town, though she could never completely hide the fact that she was different. The trouble began when they were leaving the general store. 3 women from the church were standing near their wagon, talking in voices just loud enough for Li Hua to hear. "I don't understand how Thomas Morrison could do such a thing," said Mrs. Whitman, the banker's wife, "bringing that foreign woman into his house with those innocent girls." "It's not natural," agreed Mrs. Thompson, who ran the boarding house. "A white man should marry a white woman. What kind of example is he setting for his daughters?" "I heard she practices heathen religion," whispered Mrs. Jenkins, "burning incense and worshipping strange gods. Those poor girls are probably being corrupted." Rose, who was now 13 and old enough to understand every cruel word, stepped protectively closer to Li Hua. Grace's face turned red with anger, and even little Hope sensed that something was wrong. Li Hua felt her cheeks burn with shame and hurt, but she kept her head high and helped the girls into the wagon without responding to the women's comments. She had learned that fighting back would only make things worse. But Rose had inherited her father's strong sense of justice, and she wasn't about to let anyone insult her Mama Li Hua. She marched right up to the 3 women and looked Mrs. Whitman straight in the eye. "Li Hua is the best mother anyone could ask for," Rose said in a clear, strong voice. "She takes better care of us than some ladies take care of their own children. And she's not a heathen. She prays with us every night and goes to church every Sunday just like you do." Mrs. Whitman looked shocked that a child would speak to her so boldly. "Young lady, you should not be so disrespectful to your elders. And you shouldn't be so disrespectful to my mama," Rose shot back. "She's kinder and smarter than any of you, and I'm proud that she's part of our family." Grace and Hope quickly moved to stand beside their older sister, creating a united front in defense of Li Hua. The sight of the 3 Morrison girls protecting their Chinese stepmother made several people in the street stop and stare. Li Hua gently took Rose's hand. "Come, girls. We go home now," she said quietly. She was proud of Rose for defending her, but she didn't want the situation to get worse. As they drove home, the girls were full of angry comments about the mean women and their unfair words. Li Hua listened to them with a mixture of love and worry. She was touched by how fiercely they defended her, but she was also afraid that their loyalty to her might cause problems for them at school or in the community. That evening, when Thomas came in from the fields, Rose immediately told him what had happened in town. Thomas's face grew darker with anger as he heard about the women's cruel comments and how upset Li Hua had been. "Who said these things?" he demanded, his hands clenching into fists. "Thomas, please," Li Hua said softly. "Getting angry will not help. It will only make people talk more." "I don't care if they talk," Thomas replied. "They have no right to insult my wife or upset my children." The next Sunday at church, the tension was obvious. Some families nodded politely to the Morrisons, while others turned away or whispered behind their hands. Li Hua sat straight and dignified in the pew, but Thomas could see the pain in her eyes. After the service, Reverend Matthews approached them. Li Hua tensed, expecting more criticism, but the elderly minister surprised her. "Mrs. Morrison," he said kindly, "I want you to know that some members of our congregation have expressed concerns about your family. But I've watched you and your children for months now. I see a woman who loves her family, works hard, and lives according to Christian values. Anyone who has a problem with that is forgetting the most important teaching of our faith: love thy neighbor." Li Hua felt tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Reverend. Your words mean very much to me." Furthermore, the minister continued, looking around at the people who were still staring, "I believe this congregation can learn something from your family about acceptance and love. These 3 young ladies have shown more Christian charity in defending their mother than some adults have shown in judging her." Word of the minister's support spread quickly through the small town. Some people began to reconsider their harsh opinions of the Morrison family, but others became even more determined to make trouble. The real crisis came 2 weeks later when the school board met to discuss the upcoming school year. Mrs. Whitman, whose husband was on the board, raised concerns about the Morrison girls' home situation. "I think we need to consider whether children from that household are receiving proper moral guidance," she said. "Perhaps they would be better served by attending school in another district, or even being placed with more suitable families." When Thomas heard about this meeting, he was furious. The idea that anyone would try to take his daughters away because of who he had married made him angrier than he had ever been in his life. "They can't do this," he told Li Hua as he paced around the kitchen. "Those are my children. Our children. No one has the right to separate our family." Li Hua was frightened but determined. "What we do? How we fight this? We go to the next school board meeting," Thomas said firmly, "and we make them understand that our family is strong and good, and that our children are happy and well cared for." The night before the school board meeting, Li Hua could barely sleep. She had never spoken in front of a group of American officials before. Her English, though much improved, was still not perfect. What if she said the wrong thing? What if she made things worse for her family? Thomas sensed her fear. "You don't have to say anything if you don't want to," he told her. "I can speak for all of us." "No," Li Hua said, straightening her shoulders. "I am their mother. I am your wife. I must speak for myself and for our family." The school board meeting was held in the back room of the general store. When the Morrisons walked in, the room fell silent. Li Hua wore her best dress and held her head high, though her heart was beating so fast she thought everyone could hear it. Thomas spoke first, his voice steady and strong. He talked about how much his daughters had improved since Li Hua came into their lives, how well they were doing in school, how happy and healthy they were. Then Li Hua stood up, her hands shaking but her voice clear. "I know I am different," she began, speaking slowly and carefully. "I come from far away. I look different. I speak different. But I love these children like they are born from my own body. I teach them to be good, kind, respectful. I teach them to work hard and help others. I teach them that all people deserve respect, no matter where they come from or what they look like." She paused and looked around the room at the faces watching her. "Some people say I am not good mother because I am Chinese. But being good mother is not about where you born. It is about how much love you have in your heart. It is about how hard you work to make your children safe and happy and strong. I have much love. I work very hard. My children are safe and happy and strong." Li Hua sat down, her heart still racing but feeling proud that she had found the courage to speak up for her family. Then Rose stood up, surprising everyone. At 13, she was tall for her age and spoke with a confidence that impressed the adults in the room. "My mama Li Hua is the best mother in the world," she said simply. "She takes care of us when we're sick. She helps us with our schoolwork. She teaches us to sew and cook and garden. She makes our house feel like a real home. Anyone who thinks we'd be better off without her doesn't know what they're talking about." Grace and Hope nodded vigorously in agreement, and several people in the room seemed moved by the family's obvious unity and love. After much discussion, the school board voted to allow the Morrison children to continue attending the local school. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. As they walked home under the starry Montana sky, Thomas took Li Hua's hand and squeezed it gently. "I'm proud of you," he said. "You were brave and dignified, and you spoke from your heart. Anyone who heard you tonight knows you're a good mother and a good woman." Li Hua squeezed his hand back. "We are strong when we are together," she said. "No one can break our family if we stand together." And walking behind them, 3 young girls who had learned important lessons about love, loyalty, and courage chattered excitedly about how their mama Li Hua had been the bravest person in the whole room. 3 years had passed since Li Hua first stepped off that train in Montana, scared and uncertain about her future. Now, as she stood in her kitchen preparing breakfast for her family, she marveled at how much everything had changed. The house that had once felt cold and unwelcoming was now filled with warmth, laughter, and the comfortable sounds of a busy family. Rose was now 15, a young woman who had grown beautiful and strong under Li Hua's guidance. She helped teach the younger girls their lessons and had become Li Hua's trusted partner in running the household. Grace, at 12, was gentle and artistic, spending hours embroidering and drawing when her chores were finished. Little Hope, now 9, was still the family's sunshine, chattering constantly and finding joy in everything from feeding the chickens to helping Li Hua in her garden. Thomas had changed too. The sad, overwhelmed widower who had once struggled to care for his daughters alone had become a confident, happy man who looked forward to coming home each evening to his loving family. He had learned to appreciate Li Hua's quiet strength, her wisdom, and the special gifts she brought to their lives. and Li Hua herself was no longer the frightened young woman who had crossed an ocean seeking only safety. She had found her voice, her purpose, and her place in this American family. She belonged here now, completely and without question. The morning that would change their lives forever started like any other. Thomas had gone out early to check on the cattle. The girls were getting ready for school, and Li Hua was packing their lunch baskets. But as she reached up to get the bread from the high shelf, a wave of dizziness made her grip the counter for support. She had been feeling strange for several weeks now. Food smells that usually pleased her made her feel sick. She was tired earlier in the evenings and needed to rest more often during the day. At first she thought she might be getting a cold, but now she began to suspect something else entirely. That afternoon, while the girls were at school, Li Hua walked to town to see Dr. Patterson. She was nervous about the visit, remembering how some people had treated her family in the past. But Dr. Patterson had always been kind to the Morrisons, and she trusted him to be honest with her. After examining her carefully, the doctor smiled and confirmed what Li Hua had begun to hope might be true. "Congratulations, Mrs. Morrison," he said warmly. "You're going to have a baby. I'd say you're about 3 months along, so you can expect your little one to arrive sometime in early spring." Li Hua felt joy and excitement flood through her heart, followed quickly by nervousness. She was 35 years old now, not young for having a first baby. What if something went wrong? What if the baby wasn't healthy? What if the girls felt jealous of a new baby, who would be Li Hua's biological child? But as she walked home, her hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach, Li Hua's excitement grew stronger than her fears. She was going to have Thomas's baby. A child who would be part Chinese and part American, a bridge between her old life and her new one. Thomas was fixing a broken fence post when Li Hua found him later that afternoon. She stood watching him work for a moment, wondering how to share her wonderful news. "Thomas," she said finally, "I have something to tell you." He looked up from his work, immediately noticing something different in her voice. "What is it? Are you all right?" Li Hua smiled and took his hands in hers. "I am very all right. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Thomas just stared at her, not sure he had heard correctly. Then a huge grin spread across his face, and he picked Li Hua up and spun her around, both of them laughing with pure happiness. "A baby," he said wonderingly, setting her down gently and placing his hands on her stomach. "Our baby, are you happy?" Li Hua asked, though his expression made the answer obvious. "Happy? Li Hua, I'm more than happy. I'm overjoyed. This is the most wonderful news you could have given me." That evening, they called the girls together to share their announcement. Li Hua was still nervous about how they would react, but she needn't have worried. "A baby!" Hope shrieked with excitement, jumping up and down. "We're going to have a real baby in our house." Grace clapped her hands together, her eyes shining. "Can I help take care of it? Can I teach it to sew and draw?" Rose, ever the practical one, was already making plans. "We'll need to set up a nursery. And baby clothes." "Oh, Li Hua, this is wonderful." As the girls chattered excitedly about their new sibling-to-be, Li Hua felt tears of relief and happiness in her eyes. She had worried that the girls might feel replaced or jealous, but instead, they were embracing this baby as another wonderful addition to their family. The months that followed were some of the happiest of Li Hua's life. As her belly grew rounder, the whole family became involved in preparing for the baby's arrival. Thomas built a beautiful wooden cradle, carving delicate flowers around the edges. Rose and Grace sewed tiny clothes and blankets. Hope collected smooth stones and pretty feathers to decorate the nursery. The townspeople, who had once whispered about the Morrison family, now treated Li Hua's pregnancy as a joyful community event. Mrs. Patterson brought her special tea that was supposed to help with morning sickness. Even Mrs. Whitman, who had once been so critical, offered to help with the older children when the baby was born. "You know," Mrs. Patterson said one day as she visited Li Hua, "I think having this baby is going to seal your place in this community once and for all. When people see that little one, half Chinese and half American but 100% Morrison, they'll understand that love doesn't have boundaries." As winter approached, Li Hua grew larger and more uncomfortable, but she had never been happier. Thomas was even more attentive than usual, insisting that she rest more and not lift heavy things. The girls took over many of her household tasks without being asked, wanting to help take care of their mama and the coming baby. One snowy evening in February, As they all sat around the fire after dinner, Li Hua felt the baby moving strongly inside her. She placed Thomas's hand on her stomach so he could feel it too. "Strong baby," she said with a smile. "Just like its papa." "And smart like its mama," Thomas replied, kissing Li Hua's forehead gently. Rose looked up from the baby blanket she was embroidering. "Do you think it will look more Chinese or more American?" Li Hua considered the question thoughtfully. "I think it will look like itself," she said finally. "Beautiful in its own way with the best parts of both families." "I hope it has your eyes," Grace said. "You have such pretty kind eyes. And I hope it has Papa's strong hands," Hope added, "so it can help with the farm work when it gets bigger." As they talked and planned and dreamed about the coming baby, Li Hua felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She had traveled so far from her small village in China, both in distance and in life. She had found love where she had expected only duty, had discovered purpose where she had hoped only for survival. The baby kicked again, as if responding to all the love and excitement surrounding it. Li Hua smiled and patted her stomach gently. "Yes, little one," she whispered in Chinese, then repeated in English for her family to understand. "You are very lucky, baby. You will be born into family full of love." Thomas squeezed her hand and the girls gathered closer, all of them feeling the magic of this moment when their family was complete but still growing, when the future stretched ahead of them bright with promise and possibility. Outside, the Montana wind howled through the mountains, but inside the Morrison house all was warm and peaceful and full of love. Soon, very soon, their family would welcome its newest member, and their circle of love would grow even stronger. The baby arrived on a warm April morning when the Montana landscape was coming alive with spring. Li Hua had been feeling restless all night, and by dawn she knew the time had come. Thomas rode quickly to fetch Dr. Patterson while Rose took charge of her younger sisters, keeping them calm and helpful. Li Hua's labor was long but not difficult. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, she held tightly to the jade bracelet her grandmother had given her, feeling the strength of all the women who had come before her flowing through the smooth stone. When the baby finally arrived, Dr. Patterson placed the tiny perfect child in Li Hua's arms with a smile. "Congratulations, Mrs. Morrison. You have a beautiful, healthy son." Li Hua looked down at her baby boy and felt her heart overflow with love. He was indeed beautiful, with Thomas's strong features softened by Li Hua's delicate bone structure. His hair was dark like hers, but his eyes, when he opened them, were the same clear blue as his father's. "He's perfect," Thomas whispered, touching one tiny hand with his work-roughened finger. "Absolutely perfect." The girls crowded around the bed, eager to meet their new brother. They had been so excited about the baby for months that Li Hua had worried they might be disappointed by the reality of a newborn who would sleep most of the time and need constant care. But their reaction was everything she had hoped for. "He's so little," Hope exclaimed in wonder. "And look at his tiny fingernails." Grace reached out to touch the baby's cheek. "He feels so soft and warm. Can I hold him soon?" Rose, now 16 and mature beyond her years, smiled with tears in her eyes. "What will you name him?" Li Hua and Thomas had discussed names for months, wanting something that would honor both sides of their son's heritage. "We thought we would call him Daniel," Li Hua said. "Daniel Thomas Morrison?" Daniel means God is my judge in English, and it sounds a little like Da Ming, which means great brightness in Chinese. "Daniel," Rose repeated thoughtfully. "Daniel Morrison, I like it. It sounds strong and gentle at the same time." As word of the baby's arrival spread through the community, visitors began arriving at the Morrison farm. Mrs. Patterson came with a basket of food and offers to help with household chores. Reverend Matthews stopped by to congratulate the family and meet the newest member of his congregation. Even some of the women who had once criticized Li Hua came to admire the baby and bring small gifts. Mrs. Whitman, who had once been so vocal about her disapproval of the Morrison family, arrived with a beautifully knitted baby blanket. As she held little Daniel and cooed over him, she seemed to forget all her previous prejudices. "He's absolutely precious," she said, her voice soft with genuine affection. "Such a handsome little fellow. You must be so proud." Li Hua watched this woman who had once called her a bad influence on the community, now completely charmed by her son, and she felt a mixture of satisfaction and forgiveness. People could change when they opened their hearts to love. As summer arrived and Daniel grew from a tiny newborn to a chubby, alert baby, the Morrison family settled into their new routines. Li Hua marveled at how naturally the girls adapted to having a baby brother. Rose helped with nighttime feedings when Li Hua was tired. Grace sang him songs and showed him picture books. Hope was his devoted entertainer, making funny faces and silly noises that never failed to make him smile. Thomas was a doting father, carrying Daniel around the farm and talking to him about the cattle and crops as if the baby could understand every word. "This will all be yours someday, son," he would say, pointing out the boundaries of their land. "This is your heritage, your home." But Li Hua wanted Daniel to understand both sides of his heritage. She spoke to him in Chinese as well as English, teaching him lullabies her own mother had sung to her. She told him stories about his grandparents in China, about the village where she had grown up, about the culture and traditions that were part of his bloodline. "He should know where he comes from," she explained to Thomas one evening, as they watched Daniel sleep in his cradle. "Both where he comes from and where he belongs." "And where does he belong?" Thomas asked gently. Li Hua looked around at their comfortable home, at the three girls reading together by lamplight, at the man who had become so much more than just a husband of convenience. "He belongs here," she said with certainty. "With us. This is his home, just like it's mine now." As Daniel's first birthday approached, Li Hua reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. She was now 36 years old, a mother of 4 children who loved her completely, wife to a man who had become her dearest friend and partner in life. The scared young woman who had stepped off the train in Montana 5 years ago seemed like someone from another lifetime. That Li Hua had been seeking only survival and security. This Li Hua had found love, purpose, belonging, and joy beyond anything she had ever imagined possible. One evening, as they celebrated Daniel's first steps with a special dinner, Rose raised her glass of milk in a toast. "To our family," she said with the solemnity of a 17-year-old who understood how precious their happiness was. "To Mama Li Hua, who came from so far away to love us. To Papa, who brought us all together. To Grace and Hope, the best sisters anyone could ask for. And to baby Daniel, who made our family complete." As they all raised their glasses, Li Hua felt tears of joy in her eyes. "To family," she agreed, "and to home." Later that night, after the children were all asleep, Li Hua and Thomas sat on their front porch as they had so many evenings before. The Montana sky was brilliant with stars, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of Li Hua's garden flowers. "Do you remember what you said to me in your first letter?" Li Hua asked quietly. "You said, 'Be a mother to my 3 daughters, and I'll be your home.'" Thomas nodded, remembering those words written so long ago by a desperate widower who needed help raising his children. "I did what you asked," Li Hua continued. "I became mother to your daughters, but you gave me so much more than home. You gave me family. You gave me love. You gave me place where I belong completely." Thomas took her hand and squeezed it gently. "And you gave me much more than I asked for, too. I thought I needed a housekeeper and caretaker for the girls. Instead, I got a partner, a friend, the love of my life. You didn't just become their mother, Li Hua. You became the heart of our family." As they sat together in comfortable silence, Li Hua touched the jade bracelet on her wrist, the one link she still carried to her old life in China. Her grandmother had been right all those years ago. Jade did bring good luck and protection, but the real luck hadn't come from the stone itself. It had come from having the courage to leave everything familiar behind and trust in the possibility of love. Inside the house, 4 children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and protected. Rose would soon be old enough to marry and start a family of her own, but she would always carry with her the lessons Li Hua had taught her about strength, kindness, and perseverance. Grace would grow up to be an artist, using the patience and attention to detail Li Hua had nurtured in her. Hope would become a teacher, sharing Li Hua's gift for helping others learn and grow. And little Daniel would grow up as a true child of 2 worlds, comfortable with both his Chinese and American heritage, proud of the unique family that had shaped him. The wind picked up slightly, rustling through the cottonwood trees Thomas had planted when they first bought the farm. Li Hua listened to the familiar sound and smiled. This land that had once seemed so foreign and intimidating now felt like the most natural place in the world for her to be. "I have been thinking," Li Hua said, breaking the peaceful silence. Maybe someday when Daniel is older we take trip to China. I want him to meet his other grandparents to see where part of his story began. Thomas considered this thoughtfully. That's a long journey and expensive. But if it's important to you, we'll find a way to make it happen. It is important, Li Hua said. Not because I want to go back to live there. This is my home now, forever. But I want Daniel to understand that he comes from strong people on both sides. I want him to be proud of all the parts of himself. As if summoned by his parents' conversation about him, Daniel's cry came softly from inside the house. Li Hua started to get up, but Thomas gently stopped her. I'll get him, he said. You rest. Li Hua watched through the window as Thomas lifted their son from his cradle and held him against his chest, swaying gently until the baby settled back to sleep. The sight of this strong, weathered rancher being so tender with their child filled her with contentment. When Thomas returned to the porch, he was smiling. He just wanted to make sure we were still here, he said. As soon as I picked him up, he went right back to sleep. Smart baby, Li Hua laughed. He knows he is safe and loved. As they prepared to go inside for the night, Li Hua took one last look around at the land that had become her world. The barn where Thomas worked with such dedication, the garden where she grew vegetables and flowers from 2 different continents, the pastures where their cattle grazed peacefully, the mountain horizon that changed colors with the seasons but always remained strong and constant. 5 years ago, she had been a frightened young woman with nothing but hope and determination. Tonight she was surrounded by abundance beyond anything she had ever dreamed possible.